These were Schumann's words after listening to Chopin's performance of Opus 25 No. 2, the F minor etude. This tutorial aims to help you improve your pianistic skills and reflect the delicate character of this beautiful piece. We have two main challenges. The first of these is to be able to play the entire etude slowly with its musical design, inspired by the composer's instructions. Or, as I often tell my students, a zoomed-in version of the interpretation. The other challenge is to get the piece to the desired tempo, but I'll come to that later in the video. Our initial goal is to learn it with separate hands and consistent fingerings. I use the National Urtex edition, which I can recommend because of its reliability. You can also get the Coda edition, which offers a variety of fingerings and highly productive exercises. And if you want to try the fingerings you see in this video, the free sheet music is in the description. Let's begin with the right hand. I recommend slightly flattening your hand.
Try to play with flatter hand
to help your fingers play lighter and melodic. This way, the pressing motion will be less direct than a curved hand. The wrist is the most effective tool, because by implementing certain wrist motions, we can guide the fingers, keep flexibility, produce a good sound, and not get tired. If you can play this etude already and want to improve your playing, please follow all the steps, it will benefit you too. In this piece, we will need three types of wrist motions. Type A will be used for the beginning of the first phrase, repeated 5 more times in the piece. I like to connect the larger intervals by drawing a half circle from left to right. I will simply keep my wrist flexible with the neighboring notes. Type B is used more often. Here, the wrist is more active in the triplets on the beats. We draw approximately 1/3 of the circle counterclockwise by starting with a bit of stress and then relaxing the wrist. And there is a slight nuance about the relaxation, because when the passage goes upwards, I move the wrist from a lower position to create an organic crescendo with more resistance. When the passage goes downwards, I move the wrist from a higher position, because less resistance allows me to lighten the touch and makes it more comfortable to play softly. Especially the thumb. Please work on improving the control. It is arguably the strongest finger we have and sometimes has to play the softest notes. We must avoid accenting these, as it wouldn't please the music melodically or rhythmically. Using the wrist, as I explained, will make it easier to keep the thumb softer. Then there is type C, which is used for long lines with one direction, like diminished arpeggios and scales. It's pretty familiar from earlier. When the melody moves upwards, I keep the wrist in a lower position. And when it moves downwards, I keep it higher. In this way, we can feel the required amount of weight flexibly. Let's design the first phrase that includes all 3 wrist movements. Mastering the first 8 measures will give you a clear vision for the rest of the piece. Since the time signature is alla breve, we should imagine this etude as 2 beats per measure. In fact, Chopin wrote the first draft as 2/4 and later changed it to alla breve. As for the dynamics, the composer suggests arranging them according to the melody's direction, while playing soft and legato. I want to improve the expression by adding 2 small decrescendos to the second beats on the first 2 bars and 1 long decrescendo from the 5th to the 7th bar. As a result, we could start the piece with an exciting drive and let the composer's dynamics shine. The difference between Chopin's dynamic marks and those added later is the intensity, because the composer's dynamics will be evident, but the rest will be minimal. Let's hear it once more slowly, only with the right hand. Let's continue with the following phrase, then the left hand will join the game. Nothing is surprising here. The phrase moves in very similar directions to the previous one. The most obvious difference is that it reaches a major tonality with a more positive harmony progression. Therefore, I want to broaden the sound to increase the contrast between melancholy and hope. We can do this by slightly boosting the intensity of Chopin's dynamic marks. So more crescendo and more decrescendo. Chopin ends the phrase with a bridge in the next 4 bars. let's emphasize the second beats in the first two bars, which also confirms the accents in the left hand. Therefore, I will reach the first beat with a slight wrist movement and the second with a deeper one. In both cases, I will draw a half circle from bottom to the right. I will end the phrase by emphasizing the beats lightly and playing each a little softer. To understand these wrist movements clearly, feel free to be generous with your range of motion, because as you increase the tempo, the range will decrease. I often tell my students that in this etude, the left hand can be a piece of music on its own. But also, to accompany the melody as beautifully as we can, we must design it delicately. Here, Chopin makes the timing more evident than in the right hand. He marks each beat by dividing the triplets with a slur. These beats also create an engaging bass line. See, in the right hand, the slur is interrupted only once in the entire piece. The melody has no sharp corners and is mainly created of neighboring notes. The most critical role of the left hand in this scenario is to give the piece a sense of time. Therefore, I will emphasize the first beat slightly more than the second. To shape these triplets melodically, we must avoid a direct attack. Especially the wide intervals in the first beats can cause problems for the students, because when the jump is made straightforward here, an unnecessary accent may occur with the first finger. Of course, it is possible to fix this by patiently working on it, but is it worth the effort? I don't think so. Because even if we soften the first finger, the direct attack will prevent it from sounding melodic, making it difficult to give the fluctuating feeling we are looking for. Now let's get to the solution. Firstly, we must emphasize the bass notes and play each subsequent note lighter. The good news is that the wrist can be tremendously helpful in achieving this. Since it moves in almost the same direction throughout the piece, it is simpler than the right hand. Imagine making a full circle with your wrist clockwise, starting at 9 o'clock and ending at 9 o'clock. Connecting each note with these curved movements will make it easier for you to play melodically, regardless of the shape or size of your hand. Simply fix your middle finger on the keys and move your wrist freely as you continue to circle. Now let's play the first two phrases with the left hand only, considering the dynamic progression we have built with the right hand. Of course, a little softer, as its role is to accompany. Here we need to make a tiny adjustment as the second beats contain accents. We still use the circular motion, but in the second beat, we sharply penetrate with the finger to signify the note. So the circle motion starts with a bit of stress, but ends like before. Then we finish the phrase by gently fading away. It might seem complicated to play with different wrist motions simultaneously, but here is the reward. This approach will let you play each hand with a specific character, sound and timing. Thus, we will tell the same story with two distinct voices. Please work on each hand with patience and remember that both roles have the same importance. Let's slowly put them together. Next, a repetition of the first part follows. In fact, we can see that in Chopin's manuscript, unlike most prints today, he used the repeat sign. The new section starts with the bridge motif, but carries the story to a more exciting place. We have an 8-measure phrase. The intensity of the dynamics increases in the first 4 measures and develops further in the other 4. Finally, it peaks in forte, which comes in the next section. This dynamic mark is used by the composer only once in the whole piece. Although we will be using the type B wrist motion in the entire phrase with the right hand, I have different plans regarding the dynamics. Unlike in the bridge, I will highlight the first beats in the right hand in the first 2 measures, and play the second ones lightly. As we also accentuate the second beat on the left hand, The conflict between hands will add more tension to the music. Here with my right hand, starting very gently, I will take the phrase to the next measure with a crescendo and then calm it down with a decrescendo. The role of the bass notes in the left hand is a little more prominent here. To shape the phrase clearly, we emphasize the accents in the first two measures, then melodically move the bass line in the next two and calm it on the last beat. We repeat the same plan in the following four measures, but with more dynamics. Now let's play this 8-measure phrase slowly with both hands. In the next section, we reach the 2-measure long climax. Then we hear its reflection, played with very soft dynamics. Here we will apply the type B wrist motion in the first measure, and the type C wrist motion in the second measure on the right hand. We must also control the key's resistance with our wrists, to better pronounce the dynamics. Imagine this: in forte, you enter the keys by keeping your forearm slightly down, while in piano, you stay out of the keys by keeping your forearm slightly up. Of course, without any contraction, as flexible as possible. In the following 2 measures, I will slowly disappear by making 2 counterclockwise circles with my wrist while simultaneously decreasing the tempo. Like in the first part of the piece, I will finish this section by emphasizing the beats. However, we will first start with a crescendo and excite the passage, while at the last bar, we will calm it down with a decrescendo and connect it to the next section. The left hand lives in its own world, moving independently of the right hand's melodic structure. As with most of the piece, I'll highlight the first beats and play the second beats lighter. Of course, taking into account Chopin's dynamics and keeping it a little softer than the right hand. Before moving on to the end, Chopin presents the first theme one final time, but with a slight difference. He suggests playing the last 4 notes at bar 57 with non-legato articulation. The primary purpose here is the slight delay when separating the notes. My offer is as follows. Let's first keep the fluent timing until the non-legato part of the sentence. Then, let's abruptly lengthen the melody in the second part of the 57th bar and finally return to the original tempo. This approach will add a bit of surprise to our interpretation and will make the listener hold their breath at that very moment, hopefully. When playing the non-legato notes, I keep my wrist in the upper position, as I do when playing softly. The only difference is that I'm holding it stably, to give these 4 notes a more specific color. Then comes the last phrase. I have a few suggestions here, and please try whichever interests you. Let's begin with the dramatic one. Considering Chopin's dynamics, we can focus on growth in the first 3 bars, peak at the 4th, and slowly fade in the last bar. The other option, which is my favorite at the moment, is as follows. In the first 3 bars, I will adventurously increase the dynamics, but in the 4th bar, I will suddenly start the chromatic scale 1 step softer and fade the dynamics until the end of the 5th bar, almost like running and suddenly finding yourself in free fall. We also have some options regarding the last section. For example, in the first two measures of the left hand, we can reveal the hidden melody in the high notes and conclude by connecting it to the F emphasized by Chopin in the next bar. Or starting from the next measure, we can bring out the high notes of the left hand and establish a melodic relationship with the last chord. Another option I want to show is in the right hand. Some Urtext editions include an alternative passage to bar 67. The same scale starts one octave higher. You may not have seen it before, but this option also belongs to Chopin. So if you wish, you can try. As for the last arpeggio chord, although it looks different texturally from the rest of the piece, it also reminds us of where we started. Even we could keep playing this etude like a loop if we wanted to. But of course, let's not do that. The main point is to play these two bars with a different color world, because this is the last stop. So no heavy traffic anymore. Here is what I will do. First, before I reach this chord, I will dramatically lower the tempo in the final scale and soften the melody as much as possible. After this little preparation, all that remains is to play this arpeggio like a sad guitar. I prefer to play the seed in the melody layer before the arpeggio, so I can distinguish these two layers musically. Immediately after the arpeggio, I will slowly move away. As you can see, I am not holding the arpeggio chord with my fingers, so that I can reflect the guitar color I mentioned earlier. Since the right pedal will be enough to extend this chord, there is no harm in doing this. Before I move on to tempo increasing strategies, I would like to explain the use of pedals. In short, I use the sustain pedal as Chopin wrote for some parts of the etude, and for the rest, I mostly switch it twice on each bar. Do we have to apply Chopin's pedal choices? I don't think so, because there are differences in the mechanics of the pianos of that period. Therefore, if the pedals are used in the same way on a modern piano, it is inevitable that a different resonance will emerge. Furthermore, the acoustics are also a factor in the use of pedals. Therefore, try many options. For example, how much to lower the pedal, because halfway may sound better in a small room. Or you can lift the pedal gradually. Use it shorter. Use it longer, etc. Just listen for what you like. As for the left pedal, I generally use it in every entry of the first theme and in a few parts that you will see shortly. Now we come to a critical stage, playing the whole piece as musically as possible at a slow tempo. To me, achieving this is more challenging than the original tempo you will hear at the end. Even if you can play faster, repeating this method several times in your practice routine will be very helpful. I would say this tempo is the upper limits of slow, so you can start even slower and keep repeating until you find comfort. Increasing the speed is a different experience for everyone, because we all have strengths and weaknesses in piano playing. But I will give you a few tips on how we can achieve this. First, we must determine the tempo at which we can play the piece smoothly from start to finish. It's critically important to start there, even if it's much slower than you might expect. After practicing at this pace for a while, we should move on to a speed that will push us a little more. But here, you need to be careful about taking small steps. So ideally, each new tempo should be 4 to 8 BPM faster than the previous one. I can't say how long it will take to reach the desired pace because it depends on how much practice you can get. For example, increasing 4 BPM every other day can allow you to reach the optimum speed in about a month. But of course, it could be earlier or later. It's entirely up to you. So, should we always use a metronome in this process? No, because we also need to improve our biological timing. No matter what tempo you're at, the best way to do this is to try playing without a metronome from time to time during your practicing sessions. I want to show you my 4 favorite right hand exercises to support these strategies. In the first one, I will split the bars in half and group each piece into 1/8, 4/16 and 1/8 notes instead of triplets. This exercise will allow you to start each group with ease, but also care, while increasing the difficulty for other notes. Although we do this for practicing reasons, the key here is to play as musically as possible. So when working with these rhythms, consider all the dynamics and expressions I've shown so far. The second exercise is variation of the first. The grouping here is made by 2/16, 2/8 and another 2/16 notes. Here, the aim is to increase the difficulty in these groups' joints and provide comfort with the other notes. But again, as musically as possible. The third exercise I learned from my first piano teacher can be applied to almost any piece. I wonder if you have tried or heard of this technique before. Please let me know in the comments. We must press the keys very controlled and play without producing sound. So it's natural to have difficulty on the first try, but it will be beneficial and significantly increase your control over the keys. The last one I'll show is by Alfred Cortot. While all of his exercises are incredibly helpful, this one is my favorite. We play all the notes in the right hand twice, with staccato articulation. The aim here is to develop soft touch, like I said earlier, as musically as possible. Incorporate these exercises into your routine, whether in the same practice session or dividing them over different days. It will help you speed up the tempo and improve the quality of your playing. Next comes the rubato. Although this piece is titled Etude, we can produce a performance with more engaging storytelling by making some timing adjustments. Let's take the first phrase. Here, I like to start a little slower, because I don't want to start too concretely. Instead, I dream of catching a moment in eternity and continuing from there. This almost insecure sounding debut will portray a fragile character. From this point on, considering the direction of the melody, I move the timing forward while moving upward and widen it while going downward. We must be careful not to change the tempo dramatically because, despite everything, we must preserve the piece's etude spirit. Another point where I like to widen the tempo is the transition at the 18th and 19th bars. As this point connects the first and the second parts of the etude, I will expand the timing generously and gradually return to my original tempo from measure 20. I think the character is in emotional turmoil at measures 35 and 36 and has difficulty hiding it in the next 2 bars. Right after, it tries to regain control at the 39th and 40th bars, but is soon followed by an emotional outburst. The way I'm applying rubato here should help this story. So, to increase the intensity in this 8-bar segment, I'll respond with a little tightening of the timing on the first 2 bars and a stretch on the next 2. Then, I will implement the same plan with more significant dynamics in the following 4 measures. The most dramatic tempo change is found in the transition between bars 47 and 50. To me, this part reflects giving up and despair. That's why I want to play like it's slowly disappearing. So I will start calming the pace with Chopin's smorzando sign and gradually return to my initial speed, beginning at the 50th bar. Bar 57 is a bit of particular case, because the composer ends it with non-legato articulation. Here, the aim is to clarify the pronunciation of these notes and excite the listener with the sudden expansion of tempo. I think the most effective way to do this is to keep the timing flowing until you reach the non-legato part, as if it's not going to slow down, and then suddenly take your hand off the gas. Also, during this sudden deceleration, if you lift the pedal a little, you can reduce the blur and get an even more delicate color. Starting from composer's decrescendo mark at 63rd measure, I slow down and smoothly move to the Coda. Finally, in the last 4 measures of the piece, I gradually lengthen the tempo and move away step by step. If you prefer to play the Ossia version, it might be a good idea to slow down a bit more. Before I play the whole piece for you, I'd like to end the video with Alfred Corto's words. The aim should be to give the composition a gentle, poetic atmosphere, and the perfection of the execution should merely leave an impression of veiled beauty. Let's give it a try. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please support the channel by giving a like. See you in the next video.